Racism continues to be the crux of them, and in season 2 of the anthology horror series, a black cop and a struggling artist cross paths in the most unexpected way, reveal a traumatic past. There are moments in them, the scare that will make you root for it, only to be left disappointed. The way the story unfolded at first was interesting, but by the time we reached the climax, the series stopped making much sense and everything seemed a little too convenient. LAPD homicide detective Dawn Reeve had a tough time navigating the police department as a black cop in the early 90s. Her community despised her for the badge she carried, and her racist colleagues never missed an opportunity to discredit her. Life was tough, but Dawn always reminded herself why she chose to become a cop in the first place. She strongly believed that only by getting into the system would she be able to fight for her community. After coming across 2 homicide cases where the victims were black individuals, she assumed there was a race angle to it, only to later realize that the matter was a lot more complex and personal than that. After numerous failed auditions, Edmund Gaines was hell-bent on bagging the role of a serial killer. He got a little too invested in perfecting the role, and he started to enjoy the power that a serial killer possessed. Edmund tried to be all sweet and nice, but he realized that his timid nature had gotten him nowhere. He lost his job, and he never got the roles he auditioned for. He started to lose control of himself after he was denied auditions for the role of the killer. His erratic behavior left the entire casting company petrified, and they threw him out of their office. After the embarrassing episode, he felt the need to punish someone, and he found his victim in a sex worker. He drove to a shady spot and insulted her for her life choice. With a serial killer on the loose at the time, the woman was afraid of being harmed, but thankfully the police came to her rescue. Edmund's performance during the interrogation convinced the police that he was indeed the killer they were hunting for, only to later realize that he was simply repeating the lines from his audition tape. For a minute, Edmund felt important, with everyone in the room paying attention to every word he said. But all of a sudden, it was snatched from him, and that was when he decided to kill a man. He had been keeping a close watch on the casting assistant, Donovan, who had made the mistake of laughing at Edmund's acting skills during his previous audition. He had been longing to seek revenge on him, and it was only fitting that Donovan was chosen to be his first murder victim. After breaking his bones, Edmund drove to the desert to dump his body. Deep down, Edmund was hesitant to kill the man. He knew it was so wrong, yet it turned out to be the only way to deal with the multitude of emotions that he experienced, and Donovan was ultimately bludgeoned to death. Dawn and Edmund's story unfolded side by side, giving us the illusion that it was all happening at the same time. Gradually, it was revealed that Dawn was investigating the murder cases in 1991, and Edmund was experiencing an existential crisis in 1989. Edmund did not consider the consequences of his actions, and it was only after returning home that he decided to run away. Just as he was packing his bag, he received a call from the Department of Child and Family Services confirming the address of his long-lost twin sister. One of the most crucial revelations in them, the scare, was that Dawn and Edmund were twins, and Edmund had tried to contact his sister 2 years before the murders began. Dawn was still married at the time, and her husband, Corey, mistook Edmund for their new neighbor. Edmund did not correct him, perhaps because he was not entirely sure about how he was going to introduce himself to Dawn, who had no recollection of him. He was envious of how sorted out her life was, while he struggled to keep his sanity. He was emotional when he saw her, but he did not have the courage to tell her the truth because she was still unaware that she was adopted and had a brother. Dawn was Edmund's last hope in life. Everyone in his life had disappointed him in one way or another. His adoptive parents gave up on him. He did not have any friends. His boss scolded him, and his casting agents laughed at him. Nothing in his life was worth looking forward to, and when he got Dawn's address, he assumed she would recognize him and welcome him into her life with open arms. But instead, she threatened to have him arrested when she realized he had lied about his identity. Edmund knew he would either be arrested by the police or he could kill himself, and he chose to do the latter. The one thing that was common in the murder cases was that the victims saw a red-haired man before they were killed most brutally. Dawn initially had doubts about her white supremacist colleague, Ronald McKinney, but as much as he deserved to be punished, she figured out he was not the killer. The first victim was a foster mother who mistreated the children who lived under her care. The second was a man who complained about someone watching over him. Dawn later learned about the Asian twins who were killed the same way. They made several video recordings to document their experience as well as to get a grasp on their reality. In the videos, they spoke about seeing a red-haired man staring at them from across the street. They were afraid of him, and it was evident that he killed them. Dawn learned about a little boy, Benny Alvarez, who was going through a similar experience, and his family sought help from the church and conducted an exorcism. When Dawn spoke to Benny, he complained about the same red-haired man watching him. Benny also added that he missed his brother, who was sent to Mexico after he failed to adjust in LA and got himself in trouble. Dawn waited outside Benny's house that evening to catch the killer red-handed if he attempted to strike. Chaos broke out when Benny suffered a seizure during the exorcism, and Dawn ran to his rescue. Without thinking much about the consequences, she sat him at the back of her car and drove him to the hospital. On the way, Dawn was surprised to witness Benny go through an otherworldly experience. There was no killer at the scene, yet Benny dislocated his bones and jaw, and he was killed the same way as the other victims. Dawn realized that there was something supernatural at play, and she failed to explain what she had witnessed to the investigation panel when she was accused of killing Benny. The investigation was no longer about finding the killer, but about Dawn discovering details from her past. She was surprised when the panel asked her about the time she spent at Maud's foster home. They had documents suggesting that Dawn had spent 3 years of her life at the foster home, but she had no recollection of it. She never realized how personal the investigation was. Dawn had only recently learned from her mother that she was adopted, but she did not know about her connection with Maud. Dawn was suspended from duty, and most of her white colleagues were delighted by the news. Dawn's adoptive mother, Athena, experienced the supernatural phenomenon that her grandson Kel did. It was almost as if the ghost knew her personally, and he reminded her of a past that she tried hard to bury. The spirit directed her to the black box that she had kept hidden, suggesting that she must confess to Dawn that she was her adopted child. When she came across Raggedy Andy in the basement of her house, she knew it was time that she confessed another life-altering truth to Dawn. While the audience was already informed about Edmund's connection to Dawn, it was only in the penultimate episode that Dawn found out that she had a twin brother. Her mother brought home the twins, and she remembered how inseparable they were. But Edmund was a difficult child, and she hated the fact that he was so deeply attached to the sturdy, Raggedy Andy doll. She tried to get rid of it, but Edmund always brought it back home. The last straw for Athena was when she took Dawn to the park and her husband, William, stayed home with Edmund. He had a heart condition, and by the time she returned home, she found him lying on the floor while Edmund played with his medication by his side. She could not erase the memory from her mind, and even though Edmund was little, she deeply blamed him for not helping her husband with the medication. She eventually made up her mind to return him to the foster home. Even though it broke her heart, she had to let go of him. Dawn kept crying for her brother, and to help her cope with his absence, she was told that he was her imaginary friend. Dawn's mother believed she was being punished by Edmund for the decision she made years ago. When Dawn figured out that her brother died 2 years ago, she knew it was him who was trying to reach her. She concluded that every murder was somehow related to her life, or at least they told a similar story. The twins, the kid who was separated from his brother, Edmund was now after their family. He decapitated Athena, and his next target was Kel. Dawn was desperate to protect her son, and the only way she could do so was by confronting her brother. The Raggedy Andy doll is significant in Season 2 *, both for its racial innuendo and also because of the horror element attached to it. The Raggedy Andy and Ann dolls are considered racist because of their facial features and hair. Also, the soft texture of the doll resulted in violent. The Raggedy Andy doll is significant in Season 2 *, both for its racial innuendo and also because of the horror element attached to it. The Raggedy Andy and Ann dolls are considered racist because of their facial features and hair. Also, the soft texture of the doll resulted in violent bite marks when Edmund bit into it after an episode of uncontrollable rage. Raggedy Andy ultimately became Edmund's only companion, and it came to signify the disturbed mind of the killer. Dawn carried the doll along with her when she met Edmund in the desert, where he dumped his first victim. She realized that even though he'd killed innocent people, Edmund was simply trying to reconnect with her. Edmund ultimately killed himself, and Dawn imagined a happy ending with her brother, where they spent their childhood years together and grew up to have each other's backs. Then the scare ends on an emotional note. but it makes one wonder why it took so long for the supernatural theme to be properly introduced in the series. The 1950s then Covenant was well balanced, with every episode making sense. However, Season 2 struggles to bring its core concept to life, resulting in episodes that at times make no sense. Also, even though Dawn's character is easy to sympathize with, there are moments when her desperation feels a little too exaggerated. Season 2 had potential, and it would have been great if the writers had focused on maintaining a consistent tone instead of trying to overcomplicate the plot. Nevertheless, if you enjoyed watching horror shows with unexpected twists, you can give them the scare a try, but don't set your expectations too high. Thank you for tuning in to Rush Recap, where we bring you in-depth recaps of your favorite TV series from platforms like Netflix, Disney, Amazon, and more. If you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell icon for notifications. Let us know your thoughts on them, the scare in the comments below. Until next time, happy watching.